The first hint of trouble arrived on a deceptively serene morning, when the dew clung to my curtains like hesitant whispers. The neighborhood, a tapestry of modest yet proud homes, basked in the warm embrace of early sunlight. It was a typical day in the pale crescents of Willowbrook Estates, where the most pressing concern was usually the migratory patterns of the songbirds that graced our backyards. Then Karen happened. Everyone knew Karen. Her signature haircut, sharp and uncompromising, mirrored her personality. Her presence was a storm, brewing silently, yet inevitable in its havoc. She was the self-appointed enforcer of the Homeowners Association, a title she wore with military precision. Her aim? To maintain what she called community standards, though often, it seemed, just to keep herself entertained. Her latest campaign against curtains was an unexpected assault, a decree that blinds, uniform, and beige were the only acceptable window dressing. Curtains, she declared, were a defilement to the community's aesthetic, an affront to the harmony she sought to impose. Her notice fluttered onto my porch like an unwanted leaf, stark and official against the gentle chaos of my garden. I stood at my window, looking out through the flowing fabric she so despised, and pondered the irony. The curtains, a deep cerulean, swayed gracefully. They framed the world outside like a living painting, a testament to individuality amongst the cookie-cutter conformity she championed. I could have simply complied, removed the offending drapes, replaced them with her mandated monotony. But as the sunlight spilled through, casting intricate shadows upon my walls, rebellion stirred within me, a quiet resolve. Karen, I mused, was like a pebble tossed into the pond of our neighborhood. Her demands rippled outwards, infringing on the serenity we cherished. But unlike others who might bow under her pressure, I felt the need to push back. Not with confrontation. That wasn't my style. But with a subtler, more poetic defiance. The idea came to me as naturally as the dawn. I would use her own weapons against her. The HOA budget, carefully hidden and rarely scrutinized, held secrets. Overpriced landscaping fees, suspiciously generous administrative expenses. With a few clicks and some creative formatting, the numbers were mine to command. I imagined the scene as I worked. Karen's face, pinched and pale, as she glanced at my window only to find the HOA's financial entrails displayed for all to see. A tapestry of truth hung where once cerulean flowed. I felt the corners of my mouth lift into a smile, a quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. Karen may have set the stage, but I was going to write the next act in this little suburban drama. The curtains, in all their numerical glory, would herald a new chapter. An unexpected twist in the playbook of our lives here in Willowbrook Estates. As the night fell, I sat in the glow of my lamp, contemplating the unfolding tableau. Outside, the stars blinked into existence, untouched by earthly disputes. In their silent witness, I found peace, and perhaps a touch of amusement at what the morning would bring. The air felt heavier after my peculiar decision to print the HOA's budget on my living room curtains, a silent rebellion against Karen's latest decree. It was a petty rule, but one that she wielded with the zeal of a medieval inquisitor. The curtains themselves, once bought for their muted elegance, now hung bravely, a tapestry of numbers and allocations that whispered secrets to anyone curious enough to look. I noticed her first as a shadow slithering across my lawn, her presence as unwelcome as a cold draft. Karen had come to inspect, clipboard clutched like a scepter, eyes narrowed with the precision of a hawk eyeing its prey. Her lips, pursed into a thin line, barely contained the disdain she seemed to breathe. Absurd rules began to proliferate like weeds in a forgotten garden bed. Grass could only be precisely 4 inches tall, as if the earth itself depended on this rigid uniformity. Garden gnomes, those silent sentinels of whimsy, were suddenly cast out as harbingers of chaos. Even the color of front doors was scrutinized and mandated to a palette as dreary as an overcast sky. Citations appeared like unwelcome guests in my mailbox, each one an accusation wrapped in bureaucratic language. Non-compliance fine, read the latest. A crimson slash of ink across the stark white paper. It sat on my kitchen table, a testament to her relentless campaign. Gossip spread like wildfire through the neighborhood, whispers carried by the wind. I could almost hear them on the rustle of leaves, in the murmur of conversations that ceased when I appeared. Rumors, swirling with the potency of a storm, painted me as a radical, a dissenter. The narrative spun itself, growing legs and marching through the community with a life of its own. I remained an enigma in their eyes, the peaceful defector. My actions spoke louder than any words I could utter, and so I chose silence as my shield. It was a strategic withdrawal, a gathering of strength. Each morning I watched Karen from behind those printed curtains, her figure small, yet domineering, orchestrating her symphony of control. She was the sun around which all nonsense revolved, while I stood in the shadows of her tyranny, an inconvenient truth she wished to extinguish. Her voice, when she finally confronted me, was a knife wrapped in silk. The demand was simple: conformity over innovation, silence over rebellion. But it was the quiet resolve within me that answered her challenge. This was no longer about curtains or budgets. It was a battle for the soul of our community, a struggle between the status quo and the possibility of something better. And so, the curtain saga continued, each day a new chapter in this strange dance between order and its disruptor. The lines were drawn, and in the middle of our suburban battlefield, I stood firm, a quiet storm brewing just beneath the surface. As the days flowed into one another, the atmosphere in our neighborhood simmered with an undercurrent of tension. The echo of Karen's decree against curtains still lingered, a reminder of her relentless pursuit of control over our lives. But beneath the surface, I nurtured a quiet rebellion, a subtle counter-brewing in the recesses of my mind. Every morning, I sat by my window with a cup of coffee, observing the world outside with a sense of purpose. The sun filtered through the trees, casting playful patterns on the pavement, as if mocking the rigidity of the HOA's rules. My curtains, plain and innocuous, billowed with each gentle breeze, a silent testament to defiance yet to unfold. I spent my evenings poring over the HOA's budget. Each line item was a revelation, a story of misplaced priorities and indulgences thinly veiled as necessities. I highlighted discrepancies, noting every excessive expenditure and curious allocation. The numbers danced across the paper with a life of their own, a waltz of fiscal recklessness orchestrated by those who claimed to govern us. In the quiet hours of the night, when the world was cloaked in stillness, I worked on my masterpiece. The fabric, a pristine white, was my canvas. On it, I printed the HOA's budget, each figure meticulously aligned, each column a testament to transparency. It was more than just numbers. It was a narrative woven into the fibers of defiance, ready to flutter in the morning light. The day arrived with an odd sense of calm, the kind that precedes a storm. I replaced my plain curtains with the newly printed ones, their stark whiteness gleaming against the backdrop of my living room. As I stepped back to admire my work, a sense of satisfaction washed over me. The numbers were bold, unapologetic, a secret now shared with anyone who dared to look. The neighborhood was stirring, a gentle hum of activity as people went about their routines. I observed from my window, knowing that soon enough my silent protest would catch someone's eye. A neighbor paused, squinting at the curious sight, and then another, their brows furrowing in confusion. It was a silent ripple through the fabric of our community, whispers of curiosity and uncertainty spreading like wildfire. And then, the moment arrived. Karen, with her signature brisk stride, appeared on the sidewalk. Her gaze, sharp as ever, swept across the houses, searching for any deviation from her established norm. When her eyes landed on my curtains, they widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing her features. I watched as she approached, her steps quickening like a storm gathering momentum. She stood there, frozen on the sidewalk, the irony of the situation dawning on her. The curtain had become a spectacle, a mirror reflecting her own machinations back at her. In that moment, I saw a crack in her veneer of control, a momentary falter, as if she understood the gravity of her own absurdity. The confrontation was inevitable, yet I remained serene. Words were unnecessary, for the numbers spoke for themselves. My act of rebellion was not one of anger, but of clarity, a revelation that power could not suppress truth. As she turned away, her expression a mixture of anger and bewilderment. I felt a quiet triumph. The wind picked up, lifting the edges of the curtains ever so slightly, as if applauding the unfolding drama. It was a reminder that change often starts with a whisper, a subtle shift in the air, before it transforms into a roar. In that fleeting moment, I knew that the balance of power had shifted, that our neighborhood was on the cusp of something new. The sun rose over our neighborhood like a weary eye reluctant to open. I stood by the window, gazing at the fabric of rebellion draped across my living room. The curtains, my curtains, hung there defiantly, the HOA's numbers and line items printed meticulously across their surface. The spreadsheet's stark black text contrasted sharply against the soft cream background, transforming the mundane into an unexpected manifesto. Outside, the street was waking up. I could sense the shift in the air, a kind of humming tension that lingered just below the surface. It was the sort of atmosphere that usually preceded a storm, heavy with unsaid words and unvoiced frustrations. I sipped my coffee, feeling the warmth seep into my fingers, grounding me for what I suspected was about to unfold. It didn't take long for the neighborhood to notice. Whispers drifted through the air as my neighbors walked by, their eyes drawn inevitably to the spectacle of my windows. Some faces bore expressions of shock, others amusement, a few even admiration. The curtains had become a silent conversation piece, an unspoken call to arms against the tyranny of restrictive regulations and unchecked authority. Karen, of course, was not amused. Her morning was marked by a distinctly audible gasp as she walked past, the sound grating against the stillness like the screech of a rusty hinge. Her reaction was as predictable as it was satisfying, a symphony of outrage that crescendoed in a flurry of heated footsteps retreating down the street. I watched her leave, a small smile tugging at the corners of my lips. Beneath her veneer of control and superiority, Karen was unraveling, her composure fraying like an old, worn-out sweater. There was a certain irony in that, considering her vendetta against my harmless window dressings. The day went on, each hour marked by the subtle ripples of dissent spreading through the neighborhood. Conversations grew more animated, the usual small talk infused with an undercurrent of rebellion. I could feel the shift, a slow but steady change in the tide. People were beginning to challenge the status quo that Karen so fiercely clung to. As evening approached, I could see the sunset painting the curtains in shades of orange and gold, the numbers almost glowing in the fading light. It was beautiful, in a way I hadn't anticipated, a testament not just to resistance, but to community and the power of standing firm against unwarranted authority. But beneath the beauty was the tension, winding tighter with each passing moment. It was a living thing, breathing through the walls of our homes, whispering in the spaces between words. I could feel it in the glances exchanged on front lawns, in the silences that stretched a fraction too long. Karen would retaliate. I knew this as surely as I knew the sun would rise again tomorrow. But for now, there was a victory in the air, a victory woven into the fabric of those curtains. It was a small victory, perhaps, but it was ours. I stood there, watching the last of the daylight slip away, feeling the weight of what was to come. The curtains fluttered gently in the evening breeze, a gentle reminder of the change we had set in motion. And in that moment, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me. Whatever happened next, we were ready. The crisp autumn air whispered through the neighborhood as I made my way to the community center. A muted rustle of fallen leaves marked my path, each step an echo of the quiet defiance that had been building within me. Ever since Karen, with her authoritarian zeal masked as concern, attempted to impose her vision of uniformity by banning curtains, a ripple had spread through our community. A ripple that had become a wave. It was a spectacle when I first unveiled my new drapes. Their fabric whispered secrets to the street, bold black numbers against a backdrop of white. The HOA's budget, printed in stark detail, loomed larger than life. The reaction was immediate, a murmur of shock that crescendoed into a symphony of whispers and stolen glances. Karen's planned homogenization had backfired spectacularly. The translucence she craved now laid bare in an unintended transparency. As I entered the room, the familiar hum of fluorescent lights bathed the scene in their sterile glow. Faces turned toward me, expectant, curious. I was not alone in this, and that knowledge buoyed me with a quiet strength. The meeting droned on, a litany of banalities and formalities until the moment arrived. I could feel the collective inhale, a breath held as if the room itself awaited the inevitable confrontation. Karen perched at the head of the table, her eyes like twin lasers darting around, seeking a target. Her usual composure seemed stretched thin, like a taut rubber band on the verge of snapping. Her grip on the agenda was so tight I almost expected it to crumple under the pressure. I wondered how it felt to be hoist with one's own petard. I had no intention of humiliating her, not publicly at least, but the truth had a way of making itself known, and it was time for shadows to surrender to light. My move was subtle, a series of quiet, deliberate steps taken long before this gathering. Legal counsel had been sought, filings made with the patient precision of a chess player executing an endgame. The budget discrepancies, the irregularities buried beneath layers of bureaucratic jargon, now stripped bare. It was not just curtains she had tried to control, it was reality itself. As I stepped forward to speak, the room fell into a reverent hush. Words came not as a flood, but as a steady stream, calculated, measured, undeniable. I laid out the findings, each point a stone placed carefully on the scales of justice. Eyes widened, not with shock, but with understanding. The truth had slipped quietly into their midst, and it was a comfort, a reassurance that the world still spun on its axis. The silence that followed was a living thing, heavy with the weight of revelations. It was Karen who broke it, her voice a brittle veneer over the tumult beneath. One sentence delivered with a fragility that belied the steel of her resolve. This isn't over, but it was. For in that moment, power shifted. The curtain had fallen on her reign, replaced by a transparency she could no longer control. The narrative had changed, and with it, the community breathed a collective sigh of relief. I walked away from the meeting with a sense of peace, the kind that comes from knowing one had stood against the storm and emerged whole. Behind me, the community buzzed with the energy of renewal, a phoenix rising from the ashes of a misguided tyranny. The leaves continued to fall, dancing in the crisp breeze, a reminder of cycles and change. As I returned home, I paused to look at my drapes one last time, feeling the weight of the past lift. The numbers, once a symbol of defiance, now represented something greater: truth, transparency, and the quiet power of standing one's ground. The morning sun stretched its fingers through the slats in the blinds, painting my living room with bands of light and shadow. I stood before my curtain, a billowing testament to transparency and defiance. Karen's attempt to stifle individuality had taken an unexpected turn when I chose to print the HOA's financial secrets across the fabric. It was a bold move, one that whispered rebellion in every flutter of the polyester threads. The curtain shifted subtly as I moved closer, letting the numbers coalesce into meaning. Line items, hidden expenses, and Karen's own stipends became the patterns that caught the eyes of passers-by. The neighborhood was abuzz. Whispers filled the air like leaves rustling in a late autumn breeze. The budget on my curtain wasn't just an act of defiance, it was a call to arms. I saw it in the faces of my neighbors, who had begun to loiter outside my window, as if the figures themselves could speak truths into the air. Truths that had been buried beneath Karen's authoritarian veneer. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled for that afternoon, a meeting that had, until now, been a formality, an echo chamber for Karen's dictates. But today, the air felt different, charged. I left my house with purpose, joining the stream of residents headed to the community center. The usual chatter was subdued, replaced by something more electric. A shared understanding, perhaps, that this day was ours to change the narrative. The hall was already full when I arrived. The usual bouquets of artificial plants lined the walls, their dust-dulled leaves the only constant in a room filled with uncertainty. I took a seat near the back, observing the crowd. The tension was palpable, a living thing coiled in the silence. Karen stood at the front, her expression a battlefield of forced calm and simmering irritation. She was used to control, to shaping the neighborhood to her whims. But today, her influence felt like a house of cards, fragile and swaying in an unseen breeze. As the meeting commenced, a series of perfunctory reports droned on, a perfunctory litany that lulled the inattentive. But I was waiting, watching, and then, as expected, the floor opened to community concerns, a mere formality usually. A murmur rippled through the room, a tide swelling as resident after resident rose. Quiet questions about budget allocations turned into pointed inquiries. Karen's facade cracked, her responses clipped and defensive. This was my moment. I stood, the culmination of shared frustration and newfound empowerment burning in my chest. In Karen's eyes, a flicker of recognition flared. She knew what was coming. In the silence that followed my question, the room held its breath. The curtain outside my house had turned the abstract into the tangible, and the community was no longer willing to let the curtain fall on this act of defiance. The meeting shifted. It was no longer Karen's stage. The community, once passive, was now a chorus of voices demanding transparency, demanding change. Karen's composure faltered, her voice losing its authoritative edge. She attempted to regain control with practiced rhetoric, but it was too late. The community had tasted the power of unity and found it intoxicating. The meeting ended, not with a bang, but with a quiet resolution. Karen, sidelined by the very people she once commanded, retreated to the periphery. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. I walked home slowly, my heart light. The community had found its voice, and in the echo of that collective cry was the promise of a new beginning. As I approached my house, I saw the curtain billowing gently in the evening breeze, a silent sentry, a reminder that even the smallest acts could ripple outward, changing the world one thread at a time.